The morning sun cast long shadows across the Norfolk Naval Base as Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn leather jacket and checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. She was running late, but not because she had overslept. The security checkpoint had taken longer than usual, and now she faced the most challenging part of her journey to the USS Gerald R. Ford. Sarah had been planning this moment for 6 months. Every detail had been carefully researched, every possible obstacle anticipated. Well, almost every obstacle. What she hadn't counted on was the sheer size of the naval base and the maze of protocols that seemed to multiply with each step she took toward the massive aircraft carrier looming in the distance. At 28 years old, Sarah looked like any other civilian visitor to the base. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her jeans and jacket gave no hint of her true purpose here. To the casual observer, she might have been a family member visiting a deployed sailor, or perhaps a contractor here on routine business. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was about to turn the carefully ordered world of the Navy's newest supercarrier upside down. The carrier itself was a sight to behold. Stretching over 1,000 feet in length, the USS Gerald R. Ford represented the pinnacle of naval engineering. Its flight deck could launch and recover aircraft with unprecedented efficiency, and its nuclear reactors could power a small city. For the 5,000 crew members who called it home during deployment, it was both workplace and sanctuary, a floating city that projected American power across the world's oceans. Sarah approached the gangway leading to the ship, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had come so far to reach this moment, traveling across 3 states and navigating countless bureaucratic hurdles. The folder in her backpack contained documents that would change everything, but first she had to get aboard the ship. "Ma'am, I need to see your authorization," called out Petty Officer James Rodriguez from his position at the base of the gangway. Rodriguez had been standing watch for 4 years, and he prided himself on knowing who belonged on the ship and who didn't. The young woman approaching him didn't look like she belonged here, despite whatever paperwork she might be carrying. Sarah reached into her backpack and withdrew a manila envelope. "I have orders to report to Captain Harrison," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The lie came easier than she had expected, but then again, she had practiced it dozens of times in front of her bathroom mirror. Rodriguez examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone who had seen every conceivable attempt to gain unauthorized access to a naval vessel. The papers looked official enough, complete with the proper seals and signatures. But something about the woman herself didn't sit right with him. There was a tension in her posture, a quality to her voice that suggested she wasn't telling the complete truth. "These papers authorize you for a 30-minute inspection tour," Rodriguez said slowly, his eyes moving from the documents to Sarah's face and back again. "But I don't have you on my visitor's log for today. When did you schedule this appointment?" Sarah felt a bead of sweat form at her hairline despite the cool morning air. This was the moment she had dreaded, the point where her carefully constructed story might begin to unravel. "There was a last-minute change to the schedule," she said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Admiral Peterson's office called yesterday afternoon. They said Captain Harrison would be expecting me." The mention of Admiral Peterson's name gave Rodriguez pause. Peterson was the Carrier Strike Group commander, and his office didn't make requests lightly. Still, something felt off about the whole situation. Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts during his years in the Navy, and those instincts were telling him to proceed with caution. "I'm going to need to verify this with the ship's duty officer," Rodriguez said, reaching for the phone mounted near the gangway. "Standard procedure for unscheduled visits." Sarah's mind raced. She knew that any attempt to verify her story would immediately expose the deception. The documents in her envelope were authentic, but they weren't authorization to board this ship. They were something far more significant, something that would explain why she had risked everything to reach this moment. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I understand you have to follow procedures, but perhaps you could let Captain Harrison know that this concerns Operation Atlantic Shield. He'll understand the urgency." Rodriguez paused with the phone halfway to his ear. Operation Atlantic Shield was classified, and the fact that this civilian knew the name suggested there was more to her visit than met the eye. He had been told that morning to expect possible visits from personnel connected to the operation, but no specifics had been provided. As Rodriguez hesitated, Senior Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres emerged from the ship and walked down the gangway. Torres was a 20-year veteran who had served on 4 different carriers, and his presence immediately shifted the dynamic of the encounter. At 6 feet 2 inches with graying hair and commanding presence, Torres was not someone junior sailors questioned lightly. "What's the situation, Rodriguez?" Torres asked, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of naval service. "Ma'am here says she has authorization to see Captain Harrison," Rodriguez explained, handing over the documents. "But I can't confirm the appointment, and she mentioned Operation Atlantic Shield." Torres examined the papers with even greater scrutiny than Rodriguez had shown. His trained eye caught details that the younger sailor had missed, including watermarks and security features that suggested the documents were genuine government issue. But like Rodriguez, he sensed something unusual about the situation. "Ma'am, I'm Senior Chief Torres," he said, his tone polite but firm. "I need to understand exactly why you're here and why you believe you need to see the captain immediately." Sarah knew that this was her moment of truth. She could continue with the deception and hope to talk her way past these men, or she could reveal enough of her true purpose to gain their cooperation. Either choice carried enormous risks. "Senior Chief, what I'm carrying in this envelope concerns the safety of everyone on this ship," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "I know I don't look like much, and I know my presence here is irregular, but if you could just get me 10 minutes with Captain Harrison, you'll understand why I had to come here today." Torres studied her face intently. He had interrogated enough people over the years to have developed a sense for truth and deception. Despite the unusual circumstances of her arrival, something about the woman's manner suggested genuine urgency rather than malicious intent. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to be more specific about the nature of your business," Torres said. "This is a military vessel with over 5,000 personnel aboard. We don't grant access based on vague claims about safety concerns." Sarah glanced around the busy pier, noting the various personnel moving back and forth. Longshoremen were loading supplies onto neighboring ships, and groups of sailors in their working uniforms were going about their duties. The normal rhythm of naval operations continued around them, but she was acutely aware that her conversation with Torres and Rodriguez was drawing curious glances from passers-by. "Senior Chief, what I have to discuss involves classified information," she said quietly. "Information that could affect deployment schedules and operational security. I can't be more specific here in the open, but I can tell you that my father served on the USS Nimitz for 12 years, and I would never do anything to compromise the safety of naval personnel." The mention of family naval service gave Torres another piece of information to consider. Military families understood the culture and importance of the Navy in ways that civilians often didn't. It didn't necessarily validate her claims, but it provided context for her apparent familiarity with naval procedures and terminology. "Rodriguez, continue your watch," Torres instructed. "Ma'am, you're going to come with me to the duty officer's station. We're going to sort this out properly before anyone goes anywhere." As they walked up the gangway, Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. The massive carrier stretched out before her, its flight deck empty of aircraft but bustling with crew members performing maintenance and preparing for the next deployment. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but the reality was both more intimidating and more emotional than she had anticipated. The duty officer's station was located just inside the ship's main entrance, a small office that served as the nerve center for tracking all personnel coming and going from the vessel. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh had been serving as duty officer for the past 8 hours, and she looked up with professional interest as Torres approached with the unexpected visitor. "Senior Chief, what can I do for you?" Walsh asked, her voice crisp and efficient. "Ma'am, this civilian claims to have urgent business with the captain regarding Operation Atlantic Shield," Torres explained. "Her documentation appears authentic, but the visit isn't on any of our schedules." Walsh examined the papers that Torres handed her, her expression growing more serious with each document she reviewed. Like Torres, she recognized the genuine security features and official formatting. But also like Torres, she was troubled by the irregular nature of the visit. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Walsh," she said to Sarah. "I need you to explain exactly why you believe you need to see Captain Harrison, and I need you to do it right now. This ship operates on schedules and protocols for very good reasons, and disrupting those procedures requires extraordinary justification." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether her mission succeeded or failed. The documents in her envelope represented months of investigation and research, but their significance would only become clear if she could convince these naval officers to take her seriously. Sarah looked directly at Lieutenant Commander Walsh, her hands steady despite the enormity of what she was about to reveal. The small duty officer's station suddenly felt cramped with the 3 naval personnel watching her every move. Outside, she could hear the sounds of normal ship operations continuing, unaware that everything was about to change. "Lieutenant Commander, my name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm the daughter of Chief Petty Officer Carlos Martinez, who died in the engine room fire aboard the USS Bonhomme Richard 3 years ago," she began, her voice carrying a quiet intensity that made both officers lean forward slightly. "What I have in this envelope is evidence that the fire wasn't an accidental incident." Walsh felt a chill run down her spine. The Bonhomme Richard incident had been one of the Navy's most devastating peacetime disasters. The amphibious assault ship had burned for 4 days, while pierside in San Diego, ultimately resulting in the ship being decommissioned due to the extensive damage. Multiple investigations had concluded that the fire started accidentally in a storage area, but the incident had led to significant changes in shipboard fire safety procedures throughout the fleet. "Ms. Martinez, that incident was thoroughly investigated by multiple agencies," Torres said carefully. "The findings were conclusive regarding the accidental nature of the fire's origin." Sarah reached into her envelope and withdrew a thick folder containing hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and correspondence. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she spread selected items across Walsh's desk. The papers included technical diagrams, personnel records, and communication logs that none of them had seen before. "Senior Chief, my father died trying to contain that fire, along with 2 other sailors," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For 3 years, I've been investigating what really happened that day. I've interviewed dozens of crew members, reviewed maintenance records that somehow didn't make it into the official investigation, and traced a pattern of deliberate sabotage that goes far beyond one incident." Walsh picked up one of the documents and immediately recognized it as an official Navy communication, complete with proper classification markings. But the content was unlike anything she had seen in the official reports about the Bonhomme Richard. The document detailed concerns about security breaches and personnel with potential foreign connections, dated 2 weeks before the fire occurred. "Where did you obtain these classified documents?" Walsh asked, her tone shifting from skeptical to seriously concerned. "My father suspected something was wrong in the weeks before he died," Sarah explained. "He had been working on the ship's engineering systems for 6 months, and he noticed irregularities in maintenance schedules and personnel assignments. He started keeping copies of everything he thought might be important. When he died, his personal effects included a storage device with these files." Torres examined a series of photographs that showed technical equipment in what appeared to be the Bonhomme Richard's engine spaces. Even to his trained eye, some of the equipment configurations looked unusual, with modifications that weren't part of standard Navy specifications. Ms. Martinez, even if these documents are authentic, I don't understand how this relates to our ship, Torres said. The Bonhomme Richard was an amphibious assault ship, not a carrier. The systems and personnel are completely different. Sarah pulled out another set of documents and laid them on the desk with deliberate precision. These papers contained personnel transfer records showing the movement of specific individuals from the Bonhomme Richard to various other ships in the fleet. 3 names were highlighted in yellow, and beside each name was a current assignment listing. Senior Chief, 3 individuals who were aboard the Bonhomme Richard during the sabotage are currently serving on this carrier, Sarah said, pointing to the highlighted names. Petty Officer First Class David Chen, assigned to your engineering department, Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos, working in communications, and Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Kim, serving in the ship's intelligence section. The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's words sank in. Walsh found herself staring at names she recognized, people she had worked with and trusted. The possibility that saboteurs might be operating within their own crew was almost too disturbing to contemplate. These are serious accusations, Walsh said slowly. Do you have any evidence that these individuals were involved in sabotage, or are you simply noting that they happened to serve on both ships? Sarah opened another section of her folder and revealed a series of intercepted communications, printed out with timestamps and technical headers that indicated sophisticated surveillance equipment had been used to obtain them. The messages were written in what appeared to be a simple code, but the pattern of transmission timing correlated exactly with critical maintenance periods on both ships. Lieutenant Commander, for the past 18 months, I've been working with a private intelligence contractor who specializes in counter-espionage, Sarah explained. We've been monitoring communications and financial records for the individuals I've identified. The evidence shows a pattern of coordinated sabotage designed to compromise fleet readiness without causing immediately obvious damage. Torres picked up one of the communication intercepts and studied it carefully. The technical details of how the messages had been obtained were beyond his expertise, but the content was clear enough. Someone had been providing detailed information about ship systems and schedules to outside contacts, and the timing coincided with several recent maintenance problems that had been attributed to normal wear and equipment failure. Ma'am, if this information is accurate, it represents a direct threat to national security, Torres said, his voice taking on the gravity of someone who had spent 20 years defending that security. Why didn't you take this to the FBI or Naval Criminal Investigative Service instead of coming here directly? Sarah's expression grew darker, and for the first time since entering the ship, she allowed her carefully controlled facade to slip slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried a bitter edge that made both officers understand that her story had dimensions they hadn't yet grasped. Because NCIS agent Jennifer Harrison, who was the lead investigator on my father's case, is married to your Captain Harrison, she said quietly, and because Agent Harrison's investigation was deliberately limited in scope to avoid uncovering the sabotage evidence. I have documentation showing that she received specific instructions to focus only on accidental causes and to avoid investigating personnel with security clearances. The revelation hit Walsh and Torres like a physical blow. The possibility that the investigation into the Bonhomme Richard incident had been compromised struck at the very foundation of their trust in the system they had dedicated their lives to serving. Walsh found herself gripping the edge of her desk as she processed the implications of what Sarah had just revealed. Ms. Martinez, you're alleging that a federal agent deliberately sabotaged an investigation into the deaths of military personnel, Walsh said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're suggesting? Sarah reached into her envelope one final time and withdrew a digital recording device. She placed it on the desk between them and pressed the play button. Immediately, the small office was filled with the sound of two voices engaged in conversation, the audio quality clear enough that every word was easily understood. The first voice belonged to a woman. "The investigation needs to stay focused on equipment failure. We can't afford to have questions raised about personnel security clearances, especially with the current political climate." The second voice was male. "Jennifer, I understand the sensitivity, but 3 men died in that fire. Don't we owe them a complete investigation? We owe them a thorough investigation of what caused the fire, not a fishing expedition into classified personnel matters," the woman's voice replied. "The preliminary evidence clearly points to accidental ignition of stored materials. That's where we focus our efforts." Sarah stopped the recording and looked at both officers. "That conversation took place 6 days after my father died. The woman's voice belongs to NCIS agent Jennifer Harrison. The man she's talking to is Commander Michael Foster, who was the Navy's liaison to the investigation team." Torres felt something cold settle in his stomach as he recognized the implications of what they had just heard. If the recording was authentic, it suggested that the investigation into the Bonhomme Richard fire had been deliberately limited from the very beginning. More importantly, it suggested that the limitations had come from someone with the authority to direct federal investigations. "Ma'am, how did you obtain this recording?" Walsh asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Commander Foster was my father's friend," Sarah replied. "They served together on 2 previous ships, and when my father died, Commander Foster felt responsible for ensuring that the truth came out. He wore a recording device to that conversation because he suspected the investigation was being manipulated." Walsh exchanged a meaningful look with Torres. Both officers understood that they had just been presented with evidence of a conspiracy that potentially reached into the highest levels of military and federal law enforcement. The young woman sitting before them had just handed them proof that their own captain's wife might be complicit in covering up the murder of military personnel. "Ms. Martinez, assuming this evidence is authentic, what exactly do you want us to do with it?" Torres asked. "Why bring it here instead of to the media or to congressional oversight committees?" Sarah's voice took on a new quality as she answered, a combination of determination and barely controlled emotion that made both officers realize they were dealing with someone who had thought through every aspect of her situation with extraordinary care. "Because in 48 hours, this carrier is scheduled to deploy to the Mediterranean Sea," she said. "Because the 3 individuals I've identified are all assigned to critical systems that could compromise the ship's ability to defend itself or complete its mission. And because I have evidence that suggests they're planning to sabotage this deployment in a way that will result in the loss of American lives." The duty officer's station fell completely silent as the full scope of Sarah's revelation became clear. She hadn't come to the ship to seek justice for her father's death, though that was certainly part of her motivation. She had come to prevent a catastrophe that would make the Bonhomme Richard incident look minor by comparison. Walsh found herself staring at the evidence spread across her desk, trying to process the implications of what Sarah had just told them. If the allegations were true, their ship was carrying saboteurs who were planning to strike during a critical deployment. If they were false, they were dealing with an elaborate deception designed to destroy the careers and reputations of innocent people. "Ma'am, you realize that what you're describing would constitute an act of war," Torres said slowly. "Foreign agents operating within our military to sabotage naval operations represent the most serious threat our national security apparatus is designed to prevent." Sarah nodded gravely. "Senior Chief, that's exactly what it is. And if we don't stop them in the next 48 hours, 5,000 American sailors are going to be in danger because I couldn't convince anyone to listen to the truth about my father's death." The silence in the duty officer's station stretched for nearly a full minute as Walsh and Torres absorbed the full implications of Sarah's revelations. Finally, Walsh reached for her secure phone, her training taking over despite the shock of what she had just learned. "Senior Chief, we need to get Ms. Martinez to the captain immediately," Walsh said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of an officer who had just realized she was facing a crisis that could affect thousands of lives. "And we need to do it without alerting anyone else on the ship until we understand the scope of this situation." Torres nodded grimly. 20 years in the Navy had taught him to recognize genuine emergencies, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that Sarah's evidence represented a clear and present danger to their ship and crew. "Ma'am, I recommend we escort Ms. Martinez directly to the captain's cabin. If there are hostile actors aboard this ship, we can't risk word of this reaching them before Captain Harrison has a chance to evaluate the situation." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as she gathered her documents. For months, she had imagined this moment when someone would finally take her evidence seriously. But now that it was happening, the reality of what lay ahead seemed overwhelming. "Lieutenant Commander, there's something else you need to know," she said quietly. "The private intelligence contractor I've been working with believes the sabotage operation extends beyond just these 3 individuals. There may be a support network operating within the naval community that we haven't identified yet." Walsh felt her stomach clench as she considered the implications. The possibility that a foreign intelligence operation had penetrated multiple levels of naval security was almost too disturbing to contemplate. "Ms. Martinez, how long has your contractor been investigating this network?" 18 months, Sarah replied. "Ever since we realized that my father's death wasn't an isolated incident. The contractor is a former NSA analyst named Robert Chen, who specializes in identifying foreign espionage operations. He's been working pro bono because his own brother was killed in what appeared to be an accident aboard a Navy destroyer 2 years ago." Torres exchanged another meaningful look with Walsh. The revelation that multiple suspicious incidents might be connected suggested they were dealing with a sophisticated and long-term operation designed to compromise fleet readiness. "Ma'am, we need to assume that normal communication channels may be compromised," he said. "If hostile actors have penetrated our personnel system this deeply, they might also have access to internal communications." Walsh picked up her secure phone and dialed a number that would connect her directly to Captain Harrison's cabin. The captain had been aboard for only 3 hours, having returned from a planning meeting at Fleet Headquarters, and she knew he would be reviewing deployment schedules for the next day. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Commander Walsh at the duty officer station," she said when Harrison answered. "Sir, I have an urgent security matter that requires your immediate attention. I'm requesting permission to escort a civilian to your cabin for a classified briefing." Captain Thomas Harrison had commanded the USS Gerald R. Ford for 8 months, and in that time he had never received such a request from his duty officer. Walsh was known for her calm professionalism and sound judgment, and the urgency in her voice immediately put him on alert. "Lieutenant Commander, can you provide any additional details about the nature of this security matter?" Walsh glanced at Sarah and Torres, realizing that she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. "Sir, the civilian has presented evidence suggesting that hostile actors may be operating within our crew. The evidence appears credible and indicates an immediate threat to ship security." The line went silent for several seconds as Captain Harrison processed what his duty officer had just told him. In his 15 years of naval service, he had never faced a situation where the loyalty of his own crew members was in question. "Lieutenant Commander, escort the civilian to my cabin immediately. Senior Chief Torres is to accompany you, and I want absolute operational security maintained until further notice." As they made their way through the ship's corridors toward the captain's cabin, Sarah found herself struck by the normalcy of life aboard the carrier. Sailors moved purposefully about their duties. Maintenance crews worked on various systems, and the general atmosphere was one of professional competence and dedication. It was almost impossible to believe that somewhere among these men and women were individuals planning to sabotage their own ship. Captain Harrison's cabin was located on the same level as the ship's bridge, reflecting his need to be quickly available for any emergency. When they arrived, Harrison was waiting for them, his expression serious but controlled. At 42 years old, he had earned his command through a combination of tactical skill and leadership ability that had impressed his superiors throughout his career. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you have information concerning the security of this ship," Harrison said without preamble. "I need you to present your evidence clearly and completely. If what Lieutenant Commander Walsh has told me is accurate, we may be facing a situation that requires immediate action." Sarah opened her folder once again and began laying out the same evidence she had shown Walsh and Torres, but this time she arranged the documents in chronological order, creating a timeline that showed the progression from her father's initial suspicions through her own investigation to the current threat facing the Ford. Captain Harrison examined each piece of evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood that decisions made in the next few minutes could affect the lives of 5,000 people. The technical documents showing system modifications aboard the Bonhomme Richard were particularly troubling, as they suggested a level of expertise that could only come from someone with extensive knowledge of naval engineering. "Ms. Martinez, you've alleged that my wife deliberately limited the investigation into your father's death," Harrison said when Sarah finished her presentation. "These are extremely serious accusations that strike at the heart of federal law enforcement integrity." Sarah met the captain's eyes directly, understanding that this was the moment when her entire mission would either succeed or fail. "Captain, I know how difficult this must be for you, but the evidence is clear. Agent Harrison received specific instructions to avoid investigating personnel with security clearances, and those instructions came from someone with the authority to direct federal investigations." Harrison picked up the digital recording device and listened to the conversation between his wife and Commander Foster. When the recording ended, his face was pale, but his voice remained steady. "Ms. Martinez, assuming this evidence is authentic, what specific threat do you believe my ship is facing?" Sarah pulled out a final document that she had held in reserve until this moment. It was an intercepted communication showing a planned signal that would trigger sabotage actions during the ship's transit to the Mediterranean. The timing coincided exactly with a scheduled maintenance period when the ship would be particularly vulnerable. "Captain, the sabotage is planned for 1800 hours tomorrow, approximately 6 hours after the ship leaves port," Sarah said. "The plan involves simultaneous attacks on the ship's communication systems, power distribution network, and navigation equipment. The attacks are designed to disable the ship without causing immediate catastrophic damage, making it appear that multiple systems failed simultaneously." Captain Harrison felt a chill as he realized the implications of what Sarah had described. A ship disabled in the middle of the Atlantic would be vulnerable to any number of threats, from hostile submarines to aerial attack. More importantly, the crew would be trapped aboard a vessel that could not defend itself or call for help. "Senior Chief, I want the 3 individuals Ms. Martinez has identified placed under immediate surveillance," Harrison ordered. "But I want it done discreetly, without alerting them or anyone else to what we've discovered. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, I need you to coordinate with the ship's intelligence officer to verify as much of this evidence as possible within the next 12 hours. Torres nodded grimly. "Sir, do you want me to involve the ship's security department?" Harrison considered the question carefully. The security department included personnel who worked closely with the individuals under suspicion, and involving them might compromise the investigation before it could be completed. "Negative, Senior Chief. For now, this information stays with the 4 of us until we can verify the threat and determine the scope of the operation." Sarah felt a surge of relief as she realized that Captain Harrison was taking her evidence seriously and moving to protect his ship. But she also understood that the next 24 hours would be critical in determining whether the sabotage plot could be prevented. "Captain, there's one more thing you need to know," Sarah said. "My contractor believes that the sabotage operation is designed to create a pretext for foreign intervention in the Mediterranean. If your ship is disabled in international waters, it could provide justification for hostile naval forces to approach under the guise of offering assistance." The implications of Sarah's words struck Harrison like a physical blow. The possibility that his ship was being set up as a pawn in a larger geopolitical operation was almost beyond comprehension. If foreign naval forces approached a disabled American carrier, the potential for escalation into open conflict was enormous. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to ask you to remain aboard this ship until this situation is resolved," Harrison said. "Your knowledge of this operation may be critical in identifying all the actors involved and preventing the sabotage from occurring." Over the next 18 hours, a carefully coordinated investigation unfolded throughout the ship. Using Sarah's evidence as a starting point, the ship's intelligence team worked to verify the communications intercepts and trace the financial records of the suspected saboteurs. Meanwhile, discreet surveillance confirmed that all three individuals were indeed preparing for some kind of coordinated action. The breakthrough came at 1400 hours, just 4 hours before the ship was scheduled to leave port. A search of Petty Officer Chen's quarters revealed sophisticated communication equipment hidden inside what appeared to be standard personal electronics. The equipment was capable of receiving encrypted messages and transmitting detailed information about ship systems and schedules. At 15:30 hours, Captain Harrison made the decision to act. The three suspected saboteurs were arrested simultaneously in different parts of the ship, preventing any of them from warning the others or destroying evidence. The arrests were conducted by the ship's security team, but only after they had been briefed on the situation and sworn to absolute secrecy. The evidence recovered from the arrests confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The saboteurs had been planning to disable the ship's critical systems during the first night at sea, when the vessel would be far from any assistance. Even more disturbing, intercepted communications showed that foreign submarines had been positioned along the carrier's planned route, ready to approach when the ship became vulnerable. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in a federal courthouse in Norfolk as a judge sentenced the three saboteurs to life in prison for treason and espionage. The investigation that followed their arrests had uncovered a network of foreign agents operating within the U.S. military, leading to the largest counter-espionage operation in decades. NCIS agent Jennifer Harrison had been arrested 3 weeks after the saboteurs, when evidence emerged showing that she had received payments for limiting investigations into suspicious incidents. Her husband, Captain Harrison, had voluntarily submitted to investigation and been cleared of any wrongdoing, though the scandal effectively ended his naval career. As Sarah walked down the courthouse steps, she carried with her a letter from the Secretary of the Navy thanking her for her service to the country. The USS Gerald R. Ford had completed its Mediterranean deployment without incident, its crew of 5,000 never knowing how close they had come to becoming victims of a sophisticated plot. The memory of her father's death would always be painful, but Sarah had found peace in knowing that his suspicions had been vindicated and that his sacrifice had ultimately saved thousands of lives. The 3 men who died in the Bonhomme Richard fire had been honored as heroes who died protecting their ship and their shipmates from sabotage. Sarah kept in touch with Senior Chief Torres and Lieutenant Commander Walsh, who had both been promoted and commended for their roles in uncovering the sabotage plot. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had been turned away at the gangway that morning. If her voice had not been strong enough to make them listen to the truth her father had died protecting. The investigation into the foreign espionage network continued, with new arrests occurring regularly as counterintelligence teams followed leads provided by the evidence Sarah had compiled. The network had been operating for over 5 years, responsible for numerous suspicious incidents that had been attributed to accidents or equipment failures. For Sarah, the most satisfying moment came when she received a letter from Commander Foster, her father's friend who had secretly recorded the conversation with Agent Harrison. He wrote that her father would have been proud of her courage in pursuing the truth, even when it meant challenging powerful institutions and risking her own safety. The USS Gerald R. Ford continued its service as one of the Navy's most advanced warships, its crew now aware that vigilance against internal threats was as important as preparing for external enemies. New security protocols had been implemented throughout the fleet, making it much more difficult for hostile agents to penetrate naval operations. Sarah returned to her civilian life, but she remained available to assist federal investigators in understanding the methods used by the sabotage network. Her expertise in tracking suspicious patterns and connecting seemingly unrelated incidents had proven invaluable in identifying other potential security breaches. The story of her father's death and her determination to uncover the truth became an inspiration for other military families who suspected that their loved ones might have died under suspicious circumstances. Several new investigations were opened based on evidence brought forward by families who had been encouraged by Sarah's success. In the end, Sarah's voice had indeed made them freeze, not just the sailors at the gangway, but an entire network of enemies who had underestimated the determination of one woman seeking justice for her father and protection for her country. The truth had been more powerful than any deception, and courage had triumphed over conspiracy.